Have you ever felt a chill run down your spine, even when you're alone? Tonight, that feeling might have a story to tell. Hello, I'm the Mesmer. No matter where you are, or what time it is, I'm here to guide you into a realm where shadows whisper and mysteries unfold. Leave your worries behind. Let your mind wander and drift into the unknown. Here, where shadows dance and secrets lie in wait, allow your thoughts to drift into a dream of mystery. Close your eyes, take a deep breath, and relax. If you enjoy this, don't forget to subscribe and share your thoughts. Let's begin. Howard Briggs pulled up his collar as the cold wind snaked through the barren trees, rustling the dry leaves on the dirt road leading to Black Hollow Hotel. He had been a security guard for 30 years, but he had never taken on an assignment as strange as this. An old, abandoned hotel, left to decay for nearly 4 decades, stood in isolation atop a desolate hill, shrouded in thick fog. The investors had hired him to watch over the place for 3 months, preventing intruders and checking the electrical systems before they decided whether to renovate it. As his aging pickup truck rattled along the uneven dirt path, darkness slowly swallowed the world around him. Black Hollow loomed ahead like a cursed fortress, its peeling paint and gaping windows resembling hollow eye sockets. The hotel's nameplate swayed in the wind, creaking eerily. Howard sighed, trying to shake off the unease crawling up his spine. He parked in front of the main entrance, where a large awning cast a shadow over the cracked stone steps. As he stepped out of the truck, an odd sensation washed over him, like he was being watched from behind those dark windows. Howard spun around, but there was nothing except the trees swaying in the night breeze. Just my imagination, he muttered, reassuring himself. The front door groaned as it swung open. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and the silence felt dense, as if time itself had stopped. Howard flicked on his flashlight, sweeping its beam across the reception hall. A thick layer of dust covered the wooden counter, and old sofas sat in disarray, as if their occupants had left in a hurry. The faded carpet beneath his boots was stained with dark patches, their origins unknown. On the wall, an antique clock had stopped ticking, its second hand frozen at 3:17. Howard frowned. Something about that number unsettled him, but he couldn't recall why. He made his way toward the security office, which had been repurposed as his temporary quarters. The small room was functional. A single bed, a desk, a filing cabinet, and an old radio for outside communication. Dropping his backpack onto the bed, he flipped the light switch. The bulb flickered before finally casting a dim glow. He sat down and skimmed through the logbook left by the previous overseer. Most of it contained technical instructions about the electrical systems and a routine patrol schedule, but a hastily scrawled note at the last page made him pause. Do not open room 306. Howard frowned. There was no explanation, no additional details about why the room was off limits. He flipped through the pages again, searching for any further notes, but found nothing. The vague warning lingered in his mind, gnawing at his curiosity. Stepping out of the security office, he walked back into the reception area. The atmosphere felt heavier now, as if the building itself was pressing in around him. He directed his flashlight toward the grand staircase leading to the upper floors. Dust swirled in the beam's glow, and cobwebs draped the wooden railings like delicate, ghostly veils. The wind outside howled, rattling the window panes, and somewhere deeper in the hotel, something creaked. A floorboard, perhaps, or something else. Howard's grip on the flashlight tightened. He had worked in plenty of abandoned buildings before, and he knew how structures settled, how old wood responded to shifts in temperature. But this felt different. A metallic clang echoed from upstairs, sharp and sudden, like a door slamming shut. Howard instinctively turned toward the sound. His pulse quickened. He hesitated for a moment, listening intently. The silence returned, thick and suffocating. After a deep breath, he stepped toward the staircase. As he placed his boot on the first step, a soft whisper drifted through the darkness. Howard. He froze. The air turned icy against his skin. His breath hitched in his throat. The voice had been faint, almost delicate but unmistakable. He turned the flashlight toward the source, an empty hallway stretching into the shadows. His own name, but no one else was supposed to be here. Howard's fingers tightened around the flashlight as he listened. The sound had come from upstairs, too distinct to be the building settling, too deliberate to be the wind. He pushed himself up from the chair, his joints stiff from the cold, and reached for the radio. Static crackled through the speaker as he adjusted the frequency. "Base, this is Briggs. I've arrived at the site. No intruders so far, but I'll conduct a full check. Over." Silence. Then, the static continued, uninterrupted. He cursed under his breath. The radio worked earlier when he tested it in the truck. The lack of response left him uneasy, but he dismissed it as interference from the thick fog blanketing the area. Deciding to investigate, he grabbed the ring of old keys left on the desk and stepped out into the main hall. His boots echoed against the wooden floor, the sound bouncing through the cavernous space. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing faded wallpaper peeling away from the walls, exposing the skeletal wood beneath. Cobwebs clung to the chandelier above, like ghostly remnants of a forgotten era. A draft whispered through the corridor as he ascended the grand staircase, the wood creaking beneath his weight. At the top, a long hallway stretched before him, lined with numbered doors. Some were slightly ajar, their interiors swallowed in shadow. The air carried a musty scent, thick with decay. The sound had come from near room 306. Howard swallowed hard, feeling the hair on the back of his neck stand up. He approached cautiously, his boots making only the faintest noise on the carpet. The brass number plate on room 306 was tarnished, and the wood around the frame bore deep scratches, as if someone had clawed at it desperately. He reached out, fingers barely grazing the handle, when a frigid sensation seeped into his skin. A sharp breath escaped him as the hallway around him seemed to stretch, the shadows growing longer and darker. Then, just at the edge of his hearing, a whisper drifted through the air. "Leave." Howard stiffened, the voice unmistakable yet impossible. He turned his flashlight toward the corridor behind him, but the beam illuminated nothing but the dust motes floating through the stale air. His breathing grew shallower as he turned back to room 306. Then, from behind the door, there came a soft knock. It was followed by another, and then another. Slow, rhythmic, insistent. Howard took a step back, his breath shallow. The knocking stopped. A long, agonizing silence stretched through the corridor before, from behind the door, a voice rasped out. "You shouldn't be here." A sharp chill ran down Howard's spine. His grip on the flashlight tightened as he resisted the urge to run. He had dealt with squatters before, but this was different. This felt wrong. The air grew heavier, pressing down on him. A slow creak echoed from behind the door, as if something inside was shifting, waiting. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the presence withdrew, leaving only silence behind. Howard swallowed hard. his pulse pounding in his ears. Every instinct told him to turn back, to return to the safety of his office, but years of experience kept him grounded. He was here to do a job. If someone was inside room 306, he had to find out who, or what, was there. He tried the door handle. It was locked. He hesitated, then fumbled through the ring of old keys, searching for one labeled 306. His fingers found it, old and rusted, its metal cold as ice. Slowly, he slid the key into the lock and turned it. The door creaked open an inch, revealing absolute darkness inside. Howard raised his flashlight, but the beam barely penetrated the void. Taking a deep breath, he stepped inside. The air was stale, thick with the scent of dust and something else, something rotten. His flashlight flickered, and at that moment, he heard it. A breath, not his own, right behind him. Howard spun around, but the doorway was empty. The hall beyond was still and silent. He exhaled sharply, willing his heart to slow down. When he turned back into the room, the air felt denser, heavier. His flashlight revealed a sparse interior, an old bed frame without a mattress, a wooden chair facing the far wall, and peeling wallpaper covered in what looked like faded, illegible writing. The dust in the air tickled his throat, and he coughed lightly. As he moved deeper into the room, something caught his eye. On the far wall, beneath the faint glow of his flashlight, he could make out scratch marks. Deep, uneven, as if someone had desperately clawed at the surface. He stepped closer, heart thudding. The marks were accompanied by faint words, barely legible. It seized me. The hair on the back of his neck rose. His breath was shallow now, his grip on the flashlight tightening. He scanned the rest of the wall, trying to decipher more of the message. But the decay and grime had worn most of it away. A sudden thud made him jump. It had come from the wardrobe in the corner of the room. He swung the flashlight toward it, the beam trembling. The wardrobe was closed, but it had definitely moved. Just a slight shake, as if something inside had shifted. Howard hesitated. His gut told him to leave, to lock the door and never return, but his rational mind fought against the fear. He had checked abandoned buildings before, dealt with vagrants and squatters. He couldn't let paranoia get the best of him. Steeling himself, he reached out and grasped the handle. The moment he touched it, a deep chill spread up his arm, and he pulled back instinctively. Then, the door slammed open on its own. Howard stumbled back, his flashlight swinging wildly. The wardrobe was empty, but the air inside it was swirling, shifting, like something unseen had just slipped away. A wave of nausea rolled through him. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. His rational mind screamed that there had to be an explanation, a draft, unstable wood. But another part of him, the part that had heard the voice whisper his name, knew better. Backing away, he reached for the door. As he turned to exit, his foot brushed against something on the floor. He looked down. A journal, its cover tattered and worn, lay near the bed frame. Slowly, he crouched down and picked it up. The leather was cracked, the pages yellowed. The name on the first page was smudged beyond recognition, but the first few entries were legible. He flipped to the most recent entry, written in frantic, jagged letters. "It knows I see it. I can't escape." Howard's breath caught in his throat. The journal slipped from his fingers, landing with a soft thud. He was no longer alone. A soft shuffle of footsteps echoed behind him. Close. Too close. He whirled around, raising the flashlight, and the light revealed a figure standing in the doorway. Howard's breath hitched as his flashlight illuminated the figure standing in the doorway. It was tall, unnaturally so, with elongated limbs that stretched in grotesque angles. The face, or what should have been a face, was nothing but a dark void, shifting and writhing like living shadow. Howard stumbled back, hitting the edge of the old bed frame. His heartbeat pounded in his ears as the figure took a step forward. The air grew dense, suffocating, pressing against him like invisible hands trying to squeeze the life from his lungs. For a moment, he thought of running, but his legs refused to move. Years of logic and training clashed with the primal fear surging through his veins. This wasn't a vagrant. This wasn't something he could explain away. The figure tilted its head in an unnatural motion, as if studying him. Then, it whispered. A voice, like rustling leaves and distant echoes, filled the room. "You see me?" The words sent a violent shiver down Howard's spine. The phrase was eerily similar to what had been scratched on the wall. His flashlight flickered, the beam sputtering, as if the very energy in the room was being drained. Howard finally broke free from his paralysis, launching himself toward the door. But the moment he moved, the figure vanished. Not in a blur or a motion. One moment it was there, the next, the doorway was empty, as if it had never existed. His breath was ragged as he staggered into the hall, his hands trembling. The corridor was the same, but something about it felt off. The air was heavier, the shadows darker, stretching unnaturally along the walls. It was as if the entire building was subtly shifting, reacting to his presence. Howard forced himself forward, gripping the journal tightly. He needed to get back to his office, regroup, figure out what the hell was happening in this place. Each step echoed unnaturally, his boots sounding far too loud in the unnatural silence. Then he noticed it. The hallway was longer than before. The realization sent cold dread sinking into his stomach. He had walked this hall earlier. He knew its layout. But now, the distance to the staircase seemed impossibly stretched, as if the hotel itself was warping. Howard turned, aiming the flashlight back toward room 306. The door was wide open. The room was gone. In its place was pure darkness, a void that swallowed the hallway behind it. And something inside that void was moving. Panic seized him. He turned and ran. The shadows stretched alongside him, slithering along the walls like grasping fingers. The air felt thick, pressing against his chest, slowing his movement like he was wading through water. A sound, no, a voice, whispered from the darkness behind him. Howard. His name, drawn out, distorted. He didn't look back. The staircase loomed ahead, impossibly far yet close enough to see the railing. He pushed forward, lungs burning, legs screaming. The moment his hand grasped the wooden railing, everything snapped back into place. The air cleared. The hallway returned to normal. The oppressive presence vanished. Howard collapsed onto the first step, gasping for air. His entire body trembled, his fingers digging into the railing as if anchoring himself to reality. What the hell was happening here? His grip tightened around the journal, its existence the only proof that what he had seen was real. He needed to read more, to understand what had happened to the previous occupants. Shoving himself upright, he descended the stairs as fast as his shaky legs would allow. Every instinct screamed for him to leave, to abandon this place and never return. But he knew deep down, it wouldn't let him go. Something had noticed him, and now it was watching. Howard reached his office, and slammed the door shut behind him, his breath ragged. His hands trembled as he set the journal down on the desk and flicked on the overhead light. The fluorescent bulb flickered before steadying, casting an anemic glow over the small room. He tried to calm his racing heart, forcing himself to focus. He had to find answers. He flipped through the journal's brittle pages, skimming through the notes. Most entries were mundane. Records of routine patrols, complaints about the bitter cold that seeped into the building, mentions of strange noises. But then, toward the final pages, the writing became frantic. The walls are breathing. The hallways stretch when I'm not looking. It whispers to me in my sleep. I think I saw it in the mirror today. Howard swallowed hard, flipping another page. The last entry was hastily scrawled, the ink smudged as if written in desperation. It knows I see it. It won't let me leave. A cold sweat broke out across Howard's skin. He set the journal down, inhaling deeply to steady himself. His mind struggled to rationalize what he had experienced, but every fiber of his being screamed that something unnatural lurked within Black Hollow Hotel. The radio on his desk crackled to life, static hissing through the silence. Howard jolted, staring at it as the static warped into something almost like speech, distorted, stretched out syllables. Then, unmistakably, a voice whispered through the static. "Howard, come back upstairs." His breath hitched. He grabbed the radio, his grip tightening until his knuckles turned white. "Who is this?" he demanded. The radio only responded with static, then a faint, distant knock, as if someone were at his door. A cold dread settled into Howard's stomach. He turned his flashlight toward the door, swallowing the lump in his throat. The knock came again. 3 slow, deliberate taps. His rational mind told him to stay put, to barricade himself in. But deep down, he knew that whatever was in this hotel wouldn't be kept out by a locked door. It wanted him to see, to understand. Howard pushed himself up from the chair, each movement slow and deliberate. His boots felt heavy as he approached the door. With a shaking hand, he turned the knob and pulled it open. The hallway outside was wrong. The walls pulsed, subtly shifting like something alive beneath the surface. The dim light flickered, casting long, unnatural shadows that stretched and coiled like living things. Howard stepped forward, his breath shallow. The door behind him creaked and slowly swung shut on its own. The whispers returned, slithering through the air like 100 unseen mouths speaking just beneath the range of comprehension. He turned his flashlight toward the end of the corridor. The staircase was gone. In its place, a yawning darkness stretched endlessly, swallowing the floor beneath it. Howard's pulse pounded. He was trapped. A creak echoed behind him. He turned sharply, flashlight trembling in his grip. A figure stood at the far end of the hall. It was featureless, a shifting void shaped like a man. Its presence sent a wave of nausea rolling through Howard's gut. Then, it moved. The thing did not walk. It glided, its form distorting, flickering like a bad signal. Every instinct screamed at Howard to run, but his feet refused to obey. The figure's elongated limbs twitched as it advanced, its presence warping the air around it. The walls contracted, closing in. The hallway shrank with each breath he took. Howard turned and bolted, his instincts finally winning over the paralysis. He didn't know where he was running. There was no staircase, no clear exit, but he had to move. The hallway twisted as he ran, the architecture shifting in impossible ways. Doors lined the walls, but they led to nowhere, opening into blank voids or looping back into the same corridor. The thing was behind him, its presence pressed against his back, an unseen force growing heavier with each step. His lungs burned, his legs screamed for relief, but he couldn't stop. The whispers grew louder, forming words he didn't understand. Ancient, wrong, hungry. Then, without warning, Howard fell. The floor simply ceased to exist beneath him, and he plummeted into the void. There was no impact, no sensation of hitting the ground, just an endless, weightless descent into nothingness. His flashlight flickered wildly, illuminating brief glimpses of things he couldn't comprehend. Faces frozen in silent screams, rooms that existed and then didn't. A mirror reflecting a version of himself that wasn't quite right. Then, darkness. Howard awoke with a gasp. He was on the floor of the lobby, the chandelier above him swaying gently, as if nothing had happened. Except something had. The journal lay open beside him. His radio crackled one last time, and from the speakers, his own voice whispered, "It won't let me leave." Howard sat upright, gasping for breath. The cold marble floor of the lobby pressed against his palms as his mind reeled. He was certain he had been falling, plunging into an abyss that had no end. But now, he was here, back in the lobby, as if none of it had happened. But it had. The journal lay open beside him, the pages fluttering slightly, as if an unseen force still lingered over them. His radio crackled again, a low hum filling the air, before his own voice whispered once more, "It won't let me leave." Howard scrambled to his feet, his pulse hammering in his ears. His eyes darted around the lobby, searching for any sign of movement. The chandelier above him swayed lazily, though there was no draft. The doors to the hotel remained bolted shut. The reception desk stood as lifeless as before, yet everything felt different, wrong. He snatched up the journal, clutching it tightly as he backed away toward the security office. His mind screamed for him to flee, but he already knew the truth. There was no leaving this place. Howard needed answers. If the journal had any clues, he had to find them now. He pushed through the door of the office and slammed it shut behind him, locking it with shaking hands. Sitting down at his desk, he flipped through the pages frantically. One particular entry caught his eye. The writing was jagged, as if the author's hand had trembled while scribbling the words. "If you see it, it sees you. If you hear it, it is already near. If you speak to it, it will answer." A slow chill crept down Howard's spine. His fingers traced the ink-stained paper as his thoughts churned. The entity had spoken to him. It had called his name. It had whispered in his voice. He had answered. A deep, guttural groan reverberated from the walls, making the light bulb overhead flicker violently. Howard snapped his head up, every muscle in his body seizing. The groan turned into a series of cracks and pops, wood bending, stretching, breaking. The walls were shifting. A long, jagged crack slithered across the ceiling, spiderwebbing outward. The air inside the office grew dense, pressing against Howard's chest like an invisible weight. The radio on his desk sparked suddenly, the static rising in pitch. Then, the whispers returned. Howard. The voice was everywhere and nowhere, curling around him like cold fingers. The door behind him rattled violently, as if something on the other side was demanding to be let in. His breath came in short, ragged bursts as he pushed back against the desk, eyes locked on the door handle. It turned, slowly. Howard lunged forward, grabbing the heavy filing cabinet beside his desk and shoving it against the door. The pounding intensified. Something wanted in. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the noise ceased. Silence fell over the office, thick and oppressive. Howard took a shaky breath, his body tense. He reached for his flashlight and turned it on, the beam of light shaking as he pointed it toward the door. The crack in the ceiling had widened. The radio let out one final burst of static before falling dead. And then Howard's vision blurred for a moment as a wave of dizziness swept over him. He grabbed the edge of the desk for balance. The sound had come from inside the room. His stomach twisted. Slowly, he turned his flashlight toward the corner of the office. A figure stood there. It was barely more than a silhouette, a twisting, writhing void in the shape of a man. Its limbs twitched unnaturally, as if its form was struggling to hold itself together. Howard's mind screamed at him to run, but his body refused to obey. The thing tilted its head, and for the first time, Howard saw something within the darkness. Eyes, sunken, hollow, and yet staring straight through him. Then it moved. The entity rushed forward in a blur of darkness. The last thing Howard saw before the room was swallowed in black was his own reflection in the window. Except the reflection wasn't moving like he was. The darkness consumed everything. Howard's mind was a void of static. He wasn't sure how much time had passed. Seconds? Minutes? Hours? The darkness around him was impenetrable, heavy, pressing against his skin like a suffocating shroud. Then, light. Faint. Distant. Flickering like a dying flame. His consciousness reeled, grasping onto it like a drowning man reaching for a lifeline. The light grew stronger, pulling him back into reality. Howard gasped and sat up. He was no longer in his office. The room had changed. The walls, once cracked and decayed, were now pristine, draped in elegant Victorian wallpaper. The air smelled of polished wood and faintly of something floral. A chandelier overhead gleamed, casting warm golden light. The hotel had changed. He was still in Black Hollow, but it wasn't the same rotting corpse of a building he had been patrolling. This was the hotel as it had been, decades ago, before it had been abandoned. Voices murmured somewhere beyond the doorway, indistinct but constant. Howard staggered to his feet, his boots sinking slightly into a thick red carpet that had definitely not been there before. His breath came in short bursts as he tried to make sense of the impossibility surrounding him. A faint melody drifted in from the hall, piano music. Soft, delicate, played by unseen hands. Goosebumps rose on Howard's arms as he stepped toward the door and hesitantly turned the handle. The hallway stretched before him, alive with movement. Guests in vintage clothing strolled leisurely, conversing in hushed tones. A woman in an emerald green gown glided past, her perfume lingering in the air. A porter in a crisp uniform tipped his hat as he carried a suitcase down the corridor. No one acknowledged Howard. He wasn't supposed to be here. Heart hammering, he turned back to the room he had just left, except it was no longer there. The door was gone, replaced by an unbroken stretch of wallpaper. Howard's breathing quickened. He reached out, pressing a palm to where the door had been. Solid wall. "Excuse me, sir. You look unwell." Howard spun around. A man stood before him. A guest, judging by his fine three-piece suit. His mustache was neatly trimmed, and his eyes gleamed with polite curiosity. "Are you lost?" the man inquired. Howard opened his mouth to speak, but his voice caught in his throat. He shook his head, stepping back. The man frowned slightly. "It's best not to wander," he said, his tone now laced with something else. The hotel doesn't like it when guests go where they shouldn't. Howard's stomach twisted. "Where am I?" he finally croaked out. The man blinked at him. "Why, you're home, of course." A chill ran down Howard's spine. He turned on his heel and started walking, ignoring the guest's puzzled expression. He needed to get out. Needed to find the real hotel, the decayed and ruined building he knew. This was a trick, an illusion. It had to be. As he moved down the corridor, the voices around him changed. At first, they were polite, refined, idle gossip and laughter. But then they warped, distorting into whispers. Urgent, overlapping, unintelligible. Howard picked up his pace. The whispers followed, closing in. A waiter in a pristine uniform appeared at his side, keeping pace. "Sir, you must return to your room." "I don't have a room," Howard snapped. The waiter's expression remained neutral, but his voice took on an edge. "All guests have a room." Howard didn't respond. He ran. The hallway stretched, elongating impossibly. Doors blurred past him, hundreds of them, stretching into infinity. The lights flickered. The guests and staff began to change, their figures distorting, faces elongating, eyes darkening into empty voids. The hotel was breaking apart. Howard tripped, crashing onto the carpet. The whispers swelled into a deafening roar. The walls trembled. The chandelier above swayed wildly, its crystals shattering onto the floor. Then, silence. Howard opened his eyes. He was no longer in the grand, pristine hallway. He was back in the ruined, decayed Black Hollow. The walls were cracked and rotting. The carpet faded and torn. The chandelier above was nothing but a rusted husk. But he was not alone. Figures lined the hallway. Not guests. Remnants. Shadows of the past, frozen in time. Trapped in the place they had never escaped. And at the end of the corridor, the entity waited. No longer a shapeless void. It had taken on form. A terrible, grotesque mimicry of humanity. It watched. And then, it smiled. Howard's breath caught in his throat as the smiling entity took a step forward. The way it moved was wrong, like a puppet being dragged by invisible strings, each limb slightly out of sync with the others. The shadows behind it shifted unnaturally, stretching and writhing as if alive. A deep, unnatural cold filled the hallway. The remnants, those frozen figures trapped in time, began to twitch, their heads jerking toward Howard in slow, halting movements. Their empty eyes locked onto him, and though their lips never moved, he could hear them whispering. Howard staggered backward, his pulse hammering in his ears. The walls of the hotel seemed to breathe, inhaling and exhaling in slow, deliberate motions. The entity's smile widened, revealing a set of jagged, irregular teeth. Too many teeth. "You've seen too much," it rasped, its voice layered, like a chorus of voices speaking at once. "You shouldn't be here." Howard's survival instincts roared to life. He turned and ran. The hallway twisted as he moved, elongating, stretching, warping in impossible ways. Doors flickered in and out of existence. The chandeliers above swung violently, casting erratic shadows that seemed to chase him. The whispers grew louder, not just behind him now, but around him, above him, inside him. He reached a door at random and threw it open. Instead of another hallway, he found himself standing in the lobby. But it wasn't the ruined version of the lobby he knew. It was pristine once again, as it had been decades ago. The guests were here, watching, all of them motionless, all of them smiling. Howard's chest rose and fell in shallow breaths. He turned in frantic circles, searching for an exit. The grand doors of the hotel loomed ahead, shut tight. He sprinted toward them, but as soon as he reached out, the entire room shifted. The doors vanished, replaced by a wall of dark, polished wood. "No," Howard whispered, pressing his palms against it. He turned back to the crowd of silent, grinning guests. Their mouths began to move, stretching open, but no sound came out. And then, in unison, they all took a step toward him. Howard stumbled back. The air turned thick, syrupy, as if time itself were slowing down. His limbs felt heavy. The whispers in his mind became screams. Then, a voice, not like the others, cut through the cacophony. "Howard." It was clear, familiar. It wasn't the layered, distorted voices of the entity. It was human. Howard turned sharply. Standing at the grand staircase was a man in a tattered security uniform. His face was gaunt, his eyes sunken, but Howard recognized him. It was the previous guard, the one who had vanished. "Get out," the man rasped. His voice wavered, strained, like it was taking all his strength to speak. "Now." I can't," Howard stammered. "The doors," the man stepped forward. "You have to go back the way you came." Howard's blood turned to ice. "I don't know how." The previous guard lifted a trembling hand and pointed to the grand mirror above the fireplace. Howard's reflection was wrong. The version of himself in the mirror stood still, eyes locked onto him, an unreadable expression on his face. Then, slowly, it lifted a hand and pressed it against the glass. A deep rumble shook the hotel. The remnant stopped moving. Even the entity, now standing at the far end of the lobby, seemed to hesitate. Howard didn't think. He ran toward the mirror. The moment his fingertips met the surface, the glass shattered. But instead of shards, the world around him fractured. Howard fell and landed on the cold, dust-covered floor of the ruined Black Hollow Hotel. The chandelier above him was broken, its crystals scattered. The grand fireplace was nothing but a hollowed-out ruin. The walls were decayed, the carpet rotting. Howard gasped, pushing himself up. He was back. The hotel was dead again. His breath came in ragged bursts as he scanned the room. No guests, no whispers, no entity. The mirror above the fireplace was whole again, reflecting only him. For a long moment, Howard just stood there, heart hammering. Then, from somewhere deep within the hotel, he heard a door creak open. Howard's breath came in ragged gasps as he stared into the mirror. His reflection stared back, frozen, unchanged. The hotel around him was quiet, as if the air itself had been holding its breath. Then, the silence broke. A low, guttural growl rumbled from deep within the hotel's bowels. The floor beneath him shuddered, dust and debris shaking loose from the decaying ceiling. Howard's instinct screamed at him to move, to run, but his body refused to obey. The mirror rippled. Like the surface of a disturbed pond, his reflection began to shift, morphing. The face staring back at him twisted, distorting into something inhuman. The thing that had been chasing him. It smiled. The whispering returned, stronger now. A cacophony of overlapping voices slithering through the room. The remnants, those frozen figures he had escaped, began emerging from the shadows, their empty eyes locked onto him. Howard's feet finally obeyed. He turned and ran. The hallway stretched infinitely before him, shifting and changing with every step. Doors appeared and vanished. The air felt thick, heavy, like he was pushing through an invisible force. The whispers became laughter, a cruel, knowing sound that echoed in his skull. Then, he saw it. A single door at the far end of the corridor, slightly ajar. Light poured through the crack, warm and golden, a promise of escape. Howard's lungs burned as he sprinted toward it. The walls closed in, narrowing as if the hotel itself was trying to swallow him whole. His fingers brushed the edge of the door, and it slammed shut. "No!" he shouted, clawing at the handle. It wouldn't budge. Behind him, they were coming. The remnants, the entity, the twisting darkness, all of it was closing in. The laughter stopped. Then, a whisper, soft and final. "You never left." Howard's vision blurred. The walls trembled. Reality shattered. Howard opened his eyes. He was back at the security office. The old desk. The flickering overhead bulb. The radio crackling with static. His hands rested on the leather-bound logbook, open to the final entry. "Do not open room 306. His breath caught. His heart pounded in his chest. Number he had escaped. He had made it out. Slowly, with growing horror, he turned his head toward the dusty mirror mounted on the wall. His own reflection stared back. Only, it wasn't quite right. Howard wasn't blinking. The thing in the mirror smiled. And then, from somewhere deep in the hotel, a door creaked open. The cycle had begun again. If this world of mystery has captivated you, be sure to like and comment with the tales you'd love to hear next. Don't forget to subscribe and join me again in the quiet of the night for more journeys into the unknown.